Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 27th of November of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. But when talking about the common situation along the combat line, we see a small operational pause. At least the Western countries and maybe the Russian side are trying to show us that there is operational pause. When talking about the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, they also provided us the lowest level of losses from the Ukrainian side, probably even since the beginning of the special military operation. We have the lowest losses on the Kupyansk, Donetsk, South Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson areas. But what does it mean? What does it mean? First of all, I would like to tell you and I would like to remind you that during the special military operation, there was just one pause like that one, like the pause that we let's say are facing right now, and the previous operational pause took place in the January of 2023, in the beginning of this year, and that was the Christmas Orthodox Christmas ceasefire that was announced by the President of Russian Federation Putin. There were around 3 days of this ceasefire where we haven't seen like lots of artillery rounds and many other things, and after the end of that ceasefire, the Russians captured Solidar and the battle for Artyomovsk and Bakhmut started. So I'm just trying to say that this operational pause, first of all, is not something like about the bad weather, or this is not something like a lot of Western sources are trying to say that the Russians and the Ukrainians are trying to start negotiation process. Not like that. Currently, the weather is very bad, and the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to use their reconnaissance drones. They can't use aviation, the Russians neither. And that means just one thing, that either the Russians and the Ukrainians are able and have possibilities to collect and to concentrate artillery rounds at some direction. And we know what does significant number of artillery rounds at this or that direction means. Obviously, that means a penetration and collapse of the front line from one or another side. So let's try to think and let's try to understand where exactly the Russians are going to attack after the weather is going to get better, and where exactly the Russians are going to use their superiority with their artillery rounds. When talking about Kherson direction, the Ukrainians, according to information we have, started some movements on this area. The Russians currently haven't provided us real numbers and real updates, and they haven't answered the question whether the Ukrainians started evacuation of their soldiers from this bank of the river to their bank of the river, or the Ukrainians are getting more and more soldiers. So maybe there is a movement in both directions. We don't know. But when talking about this direction after the end of this small weather ceasefire, obviously, the Russians will continue offensive operation, but I'm not sure that the Russians are going to storm this territory because there are still a lot of things to do, and obviously this area has a strategical importance for the Russians. I'm talking about the usage of this territory as something like artillery pocket, where the Russians have possibilities to bomb this territory with aviation bombs heavily, and that will bring significant losses to the further batches of Ukrainian forces. So I'm not sure that as the weather is going to get better, the Russians will attack in direction of with the purpose to erase this foothold from the Russian bank of the river. Now we are moving to Zaporizhzhia direction, and we are going to talk about the battle for Robotinov, about the Bradley Square. During the previous days, the Ukrainians made significant attempts to attack Novoprokopovka, and we see that currently the main clashes in this area are taking place in this square. Neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians can establish 100% control over this territory, and even more, the main clashes are taking place along these lines. Let's add them on the map along this line and along this line. Sometimes the Ukrainians are able to get very close to Novoprokopovka by moving from the north to the south. Sometimes the Russians counterattacks, and as a result of counterattacks, the Russians are able to get almost the edge of Robotina by the small storm squad. So basically, as I understand, everybody is okay with the current situation because neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are able to do anything. The Ukrainians can't develop their foothold further to the west in direction of Kopany, and for example, why I'm saying this, why the Ukrainians can't do this, because during the previous few weeks the Ukrainians spent a lot of time, just like 2 or 3 weeks, for trying to establish control over this small square, and as a result of clashes for just this small territory, the Ukrainians lost around 26 geolocated armored vehicles. Obviously the losses were much bigger because some of armored vehicles were destroyed in Robotyne while moving in this direction, some armored vehicles were evacuated or something like this, and we don't know the real number of losses. So obviously the situation is stable without any possibilities for both sides to do anything. So I'm not sure that as the weather is going to be stabilized, the Russians will make attempts to counterattack, let's say in direction of Robotyne and so on, because there is no sense to do this. Robotyne was reduced till ruins, and there are no even places where the Russians can hide. And furthermore, probably these fortifications among the fields were reinforced by the Ukrainian forces and improved by them, and this is going to be the second battle for Robotyne. But from that moment, this is going not be like Bradley Square, but maybe let's call it, I don't know, T-72 Square, as in the name of Russian tanks that will be destroyed in this field. So obviously this is not the direction of Russian attack. Now we are moving to the Avdiivka tactical bridgehead, and we got another very interesting update from this territory. On this video we can see the Russian attack along this tree line in direction of Staromayorsk and Urozhaine. On this video we see a Russian storm squad that were trying to clear the fields in direction of the village and basically to establish fire control or even maybe physical control over the road between Rovnopol and Staromayorsk. Obviously the Russians captured that territories because the video was published by the Russian side. And first of all, this is the part of Russian propaganda to show the progress and not to show the losses, and the Ukrainians are doing the same, obviously. And as you can see, this is the clearing process, and this is a very long video, and the main idea that the Russians captured the tree lines. So this video was geolocated in this area. Obviously the Russians managed to achieve more, and this is just a video of a small episode of the clashes, but even from this perspective we understand that currently there is a fire control over this main road that goes from Rovnopol, this straight road, to Staromayorsk, and obviously this foothold was cut. If you remember, during the autumn of this year, the Russians managed to improve their positions and secure the flanks on the north of Pryutina. You see all these videos, very heavy clashes, and probably there are very high chances that my map, this map, military summary map, doesn't correspond to the reality, and maybe the Russians had a bigger foothold in this area. But the main idea that the Russians were trying to return their positions in this area before the November counteroffensive. And if you ask my opinion, I see that there are much more chances that the Russians are going to attack Staromayorsk in this direction, and the main reason of that is not about the strategical area in Staromayorsk, Urozhaine, Makarovka. These villages are located in the lowland, and the main possible purpose of the Russian attack, first of all, is that the Russians want to reduce till zero the Ukrainian progress during the greatest counteroffensive operation that took place in the summer. This is the first attempt. The second one, obviously, even if the Russians are planning to continue special military operation and without any negotiation process with the Ukrainians, obviously sooner or later they will be forced and they will have to establish control over Kurakhova. And to attack Kurakhova, the Russians need to attack this area from Velika Novoselovka to the north, trying to cut the road between, let's say, Zaporizhzhia along the N7 and N15 road. And of course the Russians need to attack in Novomikhailivka, Konstantinovka. So anyway, for the Russian victory, they need to return positions. Furthermore, don't forget that during the previous months, the Ukrainians have redeployed significant number of brigades from this territory to other front lines like Kherson, when talking about marine brigades like 35th, 36th, 37th and 38th. Lots of brigades were redeployed from this area to Avdiivka direction. Lots of brigades were removed to Kupyansk area. So basically, currently, this territory is under protection of 58th Motorized Brigade, which is the core brigade in this area and is main, like, core brigade, the base of defense, and this area brigade is responsible for coordination of every single unit in this territory. There is 127th territory defense, 128th, there is a few artillery systems, maybe there are some tank battalions or brigade. Anyway, there are no infantry, professional infantry, and the Russians know this, so obviously they have possibilities to counterattack. And when the good weather comes, the Russians will use their collected and concentrated artillery rounds for artillery fire, and after that they will launch their hordes to the north, trying to return control over the positions they lost during the summer counteroffensive. Of course, there are very high chances that after the weather get better, the Russians will attack Novomikhailivka, but as of today we haven't received even a single geolocation from this area. The only thing we know for sure, according to the most of the mappers and most of the military experts and science organizations, the Ukrainians every single day are able to develop their position for another 50 meters, and every single day they're doing slow steps closer and closer to Novomikhailivka. This offensive operation is very slow, very risky, because all the time the Russians are located under very heavy fire, under very heavy bombardments of the Ukrainian FPV drones, but they're moving, and sooner or later they will get the distance of the rifle fire, and then they're going to be completely different story of Novomikhailivka. So obviously there are very high chances of Russian offensive operation after the weather is getting better. When talking about Avdiivka, we got a lot of very interesting details and lots of very interesting updates. According to the Ministry of Defense, the level of loss of the Ukrainians was on the level of 110 soldiers, the minimal level of losses, obviously. But obviously, from the other side, we understand that the Russians don't have any other chances. They will continue offensive operation. And the question is which direction the Russians are going to use. The Russians can use few directions for upcoming wave of attack. First one is the southern direction, and they can attack the cities like Toninka, the cities like Severnaya, and just to cut the road between Avdiivka and let's say in direction of Lastachkina. So these straight attacks is a possible solution for the Russians after the weather gets better. The second direction is to attack from industrial area in direction of the central part of Avdiivka. This is the second possible direction of attack for the Russian forces, and obviously they're going to do this, but the question is whether they're going to do this attack so fast after they establish control with the residential area, or they will wait for some time. And obviously the third direction, or third and fourth direction of Russian attack, will take place from the area of concentration of forces between these two lines in Krasnogorovka, and there are two possible directions. The first one in direction of Stepovo-Berdichi, crossing the railways, and the second one in direction of Novokalinova and Keramik. This might be the, let's say, third and fourth direction. I don't think that the Russians will try to attack from every single direction, because this might lead to some balagan and some mess in offensive orders. They need to find a solution. And now let's try to understand where the Russians can attack. First, let's start with the southern direction, with the area Toninka Severnaya. Today, the Ukrainian sources published the video of the graveyard of Russian armored vehicles. Significant number of Russian T-72s, T-64, T-90, BMP-1, BTR, demining equipment, like dozens of armored vehicles were buried among these tree lines, fields. I'm not saying that every single armored vehicle on this field belong to the Russians. Obviously, there are also Ukrainian equipment, but the most important that the Russians stacked along this tree line, and currently they haven't managed to move closer and further to the villages like Severnaya and Toninka. And obviously, this is the answer to the question whether the Russians are going to attack in this direction or not. And the answer is no. The Russians are not going to use this road to attack, because this territory is completely unprepared for further offensive operation. There are still a lot of job to do. And for example, today the Russians published the video how they were demining Marinka using FPV drones. Another new tactics, another new approach, another new thing that the Russians are trying to involve and trying to use in the special military operation. On this video we see the minefields, and the Russian FPV drone dropped some grenade or detonator, and then there was a very heavy explosion. So this is the method that the Russians can use to demine fields, and obviously using such drones they have like weeks or maybe months of work to create secure roads from Vadiana and Oputna in direction of Tonika and Severna. So this is not going to be a Russian attack, like the roads for Russian attack after the weather gets better. When talking about South Donetsk direction, this is possible. This is the second direction, the next direction of Russian attack, because we had lots of updates about the establishing control over the industrial area, about the shortening of the Russian combat line from, let's say, Yasinovato to industrial area. But I must say that the Russians are not going to attack in this direction, let's say, in a few days as well, for a few reasons. First of all, the Russians still haven't established control over the residential area on the south of industrial area, over this square. So that's why, first of all, the Russians will be forced to focus their attention to this area, trying to reduce the Ukrainians and to force them to step back. Furthermore, the Russians need to dig in deeper in this area to create long-term defense positions. And as we discussed, this part of Avdiivka is located on the hill. So this is the best position for the Russians, not to continue offensive operation, but to control offensive operation from different directions, to make Ukrainians a little bit blind from this territory, to find electronic warfare equipment, to find Ukrainian eyes, to find Ukrainian roads. And this is exactly what the Russians are going to do during the next few weeks. Furthermore, today the Russians published very interesting video, and this video took place exactly above the industrial area and from industrial area in direction of Avdiivka along a Yasinovato line. On this video we can see the Russian FPV drone that was flying above industrial area, and the thing that you need to note is electronic warfare like damage that this drone got on himself. We see how it was very difficult for operator to run this small FPV drone, because he was always dropped from one side to another, and at some point when FPV drone operator took this thought that he left the electronic warfare zone, he was captured completely by the Ukrainians. And that video took place not even above Avdiivka. And we got another video of the same type, another Russian FPV drone, but at this situation the Russians were flying further in direction of the central part of Avdiivka. This drone managed to bypass the industrial area, this drone managed to bypass the maybe ex-Ukrainian positions, but when the drone got very close to the residential area, to Yasinovato line, so this is Yasinovato line, the line that Ukrainians were using to run away from industrial area, and the drone managed to fly maybe few hundred meters, and he was basically captured by the Ukrainians' electronic warfare equipment. So what I'm trying to say, this is the second reason why there is no chances for the Russians to attack in central part of Avdiivka, is that there is a warfare, electronic warfare, suppression superiority of Ukrainian forces in this area. Nothing from, at least for now, nothing from the Russian side can enter this territory from the south. And before storming this territory, obviously the Russians need to clear this area, to find electronic warfare equipment, to destroy this equipment with FPV drones, with artillery strike, and only after that the Russians will be able to attack. So currently the Ukrainians do have electronic warfare superiority in the central part of Avdiivka. This entire area is covered, and the Russians need just to step inside of this territory and hundreds of FPV drones will attack at the same time. Of course, it's not going to be like this. I'm just trying to express my understanding that this area for now is a stronghold. The next movement for the Russians is unacceptable. They need to clear this territory before further offensive operation. So that's why the southern direction is not going to be the Russian next plan to attack. They will attack, they will clear this territory, but not the storming operations. And now we are moving to the northern direction, and as you can see, based on this map, based on these geolocations, we see a significant number of Ukrainian FPV drone strikes. And mainly the Ukrainians during the previous day were trying to attack the Russian forces on the northern area, let's say on the south of Novokalinovo Keramik, and the second area of Ukrainian focus was on the east of Stepova, which means some certain Russian concentration of forces along this territory. This is the first area line of Russian concentration, and this is the second line of Russian concentration, which means that the Russians do have forces in this area and that the Russians are ready to start offensive operation. Furthermore, we got very interesting geolocated video from the Ukrainian side from the area on the south of Novokalinovo on the northwest of Krasnogorovka. On this video we see how the Ukrainian FPV drone was bombing the Russian trenches. This video was geolocated, and based on the small icy things and the weather, we understand that this is like recent footage that maybe took place this morning or maybe yesterday during the day. So this is a very fresh video. So there are a few important things you need to notice. First of all, take a look and just note the distance from Ukrainian FPV drone to the surface. It seems that Ukrainians were trying to bomb the Russian positions in trenches from the moon, probably from the moon, because the distance is too big, and this is something like it shouldn't be. FPV drones with grenades should fly on the distance maybe 100 meters or maybe 150 meters or even less from the Russian positions, but according to this video it seems that the drone was flying much higher in comparison with the normal situation. And the question is why the Ukrainians were making this video, how they were flying so far from the ground. You need to understand, as you can see, this drone sent significant number of grenades to the Russian positions, but I'm 400% sure that as a result of those bombardments, the Ukrainians haven't managed even to wound even a single Russian soldier, because they just were dropping because they can't drop. And this is the first. But one more time, why the Ukrainians were flying so high from the surface? And there are few, obviously you may ask, we might have your own answer to the question, but my answer to this question is that the Russians have established electronic warfare shield in this area, and that this territory was under protection of electronic warfare, and basically the Ukrainians didn't have possibilities to fly on the lower distances from the surface, because in this case they would be captured by the Russian equipment, and that's it. So what does it mean? The concentration of FPV drone strikes, first evidence, the attacks from a very high distance, the second evidence. Another video on these scenes, you can see how the Ukrainians were bombing the Russians with artillery strikes. If you ask my opinion, I don't remember when exactly the Ukrainians for the last time shown us the video how they were bombing the Russians with artillery forces. So it's something rare when the Ukrainians use artillery like M77 howitzers or something like this against the Russians in trenches. It's a very unique and rare scene, and now we are the witnesses of this episode. This is another, let's say, evidence that the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to attack this territory with FPV drones, and they need to bomb and suppress the Russians with artillery, which is less effective in comparison with FPV drones, but they have FPV drones. So all these things are telling me that the Russians' next wave of attack after the weather is going to get better will be in direction of Novokalinovo. From the south to the north, they have concentrated forces. They have created an electronic warfare shield above the Russian territories during the previous days, and of course the Russians will continue storming operations Stepovo-Berdichi, because we have certain focus of Ukrainian FPV drone activity in this area as well. So after the weather going to get better, the Russians will bring their saved and concentrated artillery rounds to this direction, and they will start everything from the beginning. Not from the beginning, but they will try to improve their positions in Novokalinovo, Keramik, maybe in direction of this village, between this residential area between the railways, and this is like the most logical movements of the Russian forces, not just because they can, but it's also very important to develop their positions this way. Furthermore, now we are moving to Bakhmut, Artyomov's direction, where we got also a lot of updates. We have lots of updates from Klishchiivka. According to information we have, the Ukrainians start leaving Klishchiivka. They start removing their forces from the ground because it's very difficult to hold this territory. The Ukrainian sources are saying that all of the soldiers are redeployed in direction of Chasiv Yar. These territories, just think about this, these territories was under control of Ukrainian forces who were redeployed on these positions maybe even a month ago. Maybe 2-3 weeks ago, let's say, but a long time ago. And during this period of time, the Ukrainians were trying to hold this territory. The thing is that the Russians start using night vision equipment, and there are no chances for the Ukrainians to make a normal rotation, to redeploy forces from one side to another, to bring positions. So the only thing the Ukrainians can do is to give the Ukrainians food, ammo, and to tell them to hold the territory. And the Ukrainians did that. They were holding these territories, and they were trying to survive all these days. And now the Russians are saying that most of the wounders had a lot of problems, has frostbites of their hands, legs, and lots of people were moved to the Chasiv Yar hospital, a lot of 300s, a lot of 200s, and furthermore the Russians are saying that starting off today the Ukrainians start surrendering in Klishchiivka. They don't have possibilities to evacuate to Chasiv Yar, and the Ukrainians are surrendering with small groups of 10-15 soldiers, and the Russians are saying that most of them are Georgians and Polish volunteers or mercenaries, whatever you like better. So the situation in Klishchiivka is getting worse, and obviously, according to these updates, the Russians are going to establish control over this city village very soon. When talking about Lyman direction, the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, the Ukrainians lost 280 soldiers. This is the only area with the heaviest level of losses. But the Russians also added that during the previous 24 hours they bombed and attacked mainly the positions of 84th Air Mobile Brigade, and this is the reason of such a level of losses. I'll remind you that during the previous days the Russians started using RBK 500 aviation cluster rounds against this territory. We also have the video of the claims of 54th Brigade about the problems, so there are very high chances that this area is going to be the second area of Russian, greatest small tactical offensive operation after the weather gets better. So Avdiivka at the north and Bilogorovka, because during the previous days we got a lot of updates, a lot of geolocations, a lot of losses, and basically the 54th Brigade has almost lost its combat capabilities based on the reports and geolocations and videos we had during the previous few days. So everything tells me, all this evidence tells me that this possible the second area of Russian penetration and the area where the Russians will be able to collapse the Ukrainian defense. When talking about Kupyansk area, the Russians continue an offensive operation. We have the video of Russian, broad frontline attack with infantry. One more time, we're not going to watch this video because due to the significant losses among personnel. The Ukrainians published the video how they managed to discover the Russian artillery system, and this is very important video that I would like to pay your attention. Take a look at the interface of this drone. This is something new, at least to me. I saw interface of Lancet, of Arlan, of different types of drones, of FPV drones, of Baba Yaga drone, but I don't remember such an interface of drone from the Ukrainian side. As for me, this is something new. Maybe the drone is old model, but as I see that the application and installed operational system inside of this drone is new, it's something new. If you know what is this interface, please share with us in the comments, but as I see something new. So anyway, the Ukrainians managed to discover the Russian artillery system and destroy that system with HIMARS strike. The clashes in Sinkovka continues, and we expect and wait also from day to day some updates about the collapse and final capture of this village, because the Russians during the previous months, according to reports, managed to enter the village maybe 10 or 20 times. So maybe these are the final times, who knows. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.